So let's get into editorial calendars, okay? So this is where I'm going to try to be fancy again with the technology, and hopefully it'll work. So here's me in the little circle, and I got my slides here for you. Tried to make the print bigger this time so you all could see it. So let's start with why editorial calendars are so super important for nonprofits. As I said, I mentioned last week in some of our trends reporting that we see repeatedly that nonprofits that use editorial planning and editorial calendars tend to be much more effective with their communication. So that's obviously a big reason. So I think of an editorial calendar as a magical cat herding lasso, because that's all you do all day when you're a communications director is herd cats, right? Your employees that you work with, your coworkers, are cats. Your boss is a cat. The people that you work with that are vendors are cats. Facebook is a cat. The algorithm is a cat. Okay? So you have all kinds of cats. Stuff is changing constantly on you. And you are just running around chasing everybody. That is a recipe for a real lack of job satisfaction and not wanting to stay in the sector. And we want you to stay in the sector. So we need to get you the magical cat herding lasso, and that is your editorial calendar. So beyond that, what does it do? Why does it really lasso the cats? Because it really helps others see both the volume and pace of your communications for your organization. Communications and what you do with all those communications channels is very mysterious to people that don't have communications expertise. They think it's like this thing you're doing over there and it's just all happening. And you need to let them sort of peek into that. And so the editorial calendar really lets you do that. It encapsulates the volume, how much stuff you're making, as well as the pace when it comes out. What's the frequency of your communications? It puts all of that and makes it visible to people in your organization when you put it into an editorial calendar. So that's extremely helpful as well. And it also helps you as the strategy person for communications in your organization find the Goldilocks zone. So, you know, this is the not too much, not too little, but just right. So it helps you figure out what is the right amount of content that we can create given the staff that we have, and given that what our goals are and which communications channels we're using, what is that right volume and pace of communications? You build that into the calendar. So you can see if you have too much content or too little content, and everyone around you that you're working with can also see that too. You can say, you know what, I can do all these extra things that you just threw at me this week, but it's really going to push us out of our Goldilocks zone, okay? So those are some really important reasons that you need an editorial calendar. I'm going to give you 3 questions to think about as you're picking your software, but I'm just going to check in on the comments and make sure things are working. It sounds like they are, and it sounds like a lot of you have come over. Nancy is using Google Drive spreadsheet. Kim is trying Asana. Regina's got the editorial calendar in her head. Molly's doing my head in a printed calendar in the office. It's helpful for other people to be able to see it. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so for those of you that are thinking about maybe switching up the way you do your calendar or starting one for the first time, I've got 3 questions I want you to think about. Okay, so the first question is, what is it that we can't see now? And another way to think of this is, what problem would a new editorial calendar solve for you? Because not every tool is going to help you see the same things. You're going to see lots of different things. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're picking a tool that's the right tool to solve your specific problem. So maybe you're having trouble just keeping track of what's going out in which channel. Maybe you're having trouble keeping track of who has seen something and who hasn't, or the drafts that people are doing. What is it that you can't see? Maybe you're not really repurposing content very well, and so you're trying to figure out something that's going to help you make sure that you're repurposing content. Whatever the thing is that you can't see or feel now that you want your editorial calendar to solve for you, it's really helpful if you can actually articulate that specific problem. It makes a big difference in choosing the right software. So the next question that I suggest you ask, and not just to yourself, but potentially to other team members, they may or may not need to see the editorial calendar and understand the inner workings. This may be just something that you do, but you want to see if you have spreadsheet brain or calendar brain. Two very different kinds of brains, and sometimes you can use one over the other for various tasks. But I found that the overwhelming majority of people who are trying to use a tool for an editorial calendar really do prefer one or the other. And so, for example, I'm good with spreadsheets. They're not my favorite, but I can use them. Sometimes I like to use them for long-term planning because I feel like I can see more stuff at once. But I really have calendar brain because I'm very calendar driven and very deadline driven. So at Nonprofit Marketing Guide, we have a series of Google calendars that are layered, different channel, different calendar. They all have their own colors. And that's what Christina and Maggie and I use to really manage our editorial calendar. So you really want to think about which brain you have because that's going to affect which tools you pick. And then the third question that I would encourage you all to ask yourselves is just how much do I want to track regularly? A lot of people will jump into producing a brand new fancy editorial calendar. Woo, I got cats racing through the office. It's always something around here, I'm telling you. And they'll put way too much stuff in it. And then they have to keep feeling like they have to keep updating it. And it becomes this big burden and this big just pain. And that's the complete opposite of what your editorial calendar should be doing for you. It should be making you feel smarter. You should see that the immediate investment that you put into keeping that thing up to date actually is worth it. And if you feel like you're just sort of updating stuff and then never looking at it again or ever using it in any way that's making you feel more effective, then you shouldn't be tracking that stuff. It doesn't need to be in there. Now, for those of you that are trying to really track the content creation, review, approval process within your organizations, and you've got lots of cats that you're managing, upgrading beyond a basic spreadsheet or calendar to more of a project management tool is probably eventually going to be a good idea for you. But again, you still want to know whether you're calendar brain or spreadsheet brain, because that'll determine which of the project management tools you upgrade to. So if you really are more of a spreadsheet person, you're probably going to want to look at something like a Smartsheets that is based on spreadsheets but has lots of other functions as well. If you are more of a calendar and to-do list person, you might want to upgrade to something like Asana, which really lets you meld those check boxes and assignments and still see it on the calendar. There are other tools out there if you're a really visual person, especially if you have a lot of content that's moving around. If you're in a really fast-paced environment where you really actually don't know what you're going to publish tomorrow until tomorrow morning, then something like Trello can be really nice because it's just super easy to shift stuff around. What else? CoSchedule is another tool out there. It's a little more expensive, but it's really built as an editorial calendar tool for digital in particular. And so you can put all your content in there and it really sort of houses the content more. A lot of these other tools, you're likely going to have your content on your internal drive somewhere or shared drive, and CoSchedule really lets you bring the content into the tool a little bit more. So I'd love to hear from you about, again, which tools you all are using. Feel free to share those in the comments, and I'll try to keep an eye on those. If I can get the comments to keep helping me here. So let's talk about 4 editorial best practices real quick. And then I'm going to ask you guys some questions. We're going to play with the bot a little bit. Let me keep an eye on the clock here. Okay, we're doing good. So 4 editorial best practices. The first one would be to do a big picture communications timeline. This is something that you ideally are doing on a big whiteboard or on just huge pieces of paper. When Christina and I do this, we take one of those free calendars that usually environmental groups or animal groups send, and we turn apart and post it on the wall. So we have like the big calendar on the wall. And then we sort of draw lots of big lines on it and put everything on there. So this should be all of your program and fundraising and communications, events, milestones, deadlines, themes, what you think you're going to be asking people to do when. Get it all on the timeline so that you can really see the life and times from a communications perspective of your nonprofit. This is one of the first things I do with new clients, and it always helps them understand, oh, now I understand why April is ridiculous. Oh, here comes the cats. So, it really helps you see where the overlap is and where you have a little more flexibility, maybe to move some things around. So that's your big picture communications timeline. Then you have your editorial calendar, which we've talked about. And the editorial calendar is really, it has to have three things in it first. It has to have your messaging, the topics, the things you're talking about, writing about. It has to have your communications channels, so the place that you're putting the messaging, so email, print, Facebook, in-person speaking, press releases, those would all be your channels. And then it has to have that element of time. And so for most of you, this is going to be a day-by-day kind of thing. Some of you, when you're looking further out, maybe you'll just sort of look week to week and you'll say, okay, in that week, 6 months from now, I know I have to cover this thing, this topic. But generally speaking, that's what you're looking for in an editorial calendar. It's the messaging, the channel, and the timing. Now, when you get more complicated and you upgrade into some of those project management tools, you can certainly add other stuff that really helps you track that whole content creation process and approval process. Who's responsible for it? Has so-and-so looked at the draft yet? Is this approved? Is this ready to be repurposed into other channels? All of that kind of stuff can be included in your editorial calendar as well. So your next best practice, your third one that I'm going to mention today, is editorial meetings. So you have this calendar, fabulous, but stuff happens, things change. You actually need to build a lot of flexibility into that calendar. So when all the stuff comes up, it's not a big shock to you. You're ready for it. So we really suggest that you have a number of different kinds of editorial meetings. One might be a quarterly meeting that you have with your program directors, and you ask them to tell you what they're going to need from you in, say, the next 3 months. And you really talk through, it's kind of like a mini version of the big picture communications timeline. It's an opportunity for them to think a little more strategically about what communications needs they're going to have and to share that with you. So that might be quarterly. Monthly, you might actually look at your editorial calendar for the next 4 to 6 weeks and make adjustments, schedule in stuff that's come up since the last time you took that long-term view. Confirm with other people that they are in fact ready to talk about those things, and really just try to firm up the next 4 to 6 weeks. And then on a weekly basis, and for some of you this will even be more often than that, those meetings you're checking in with, okay, on Wednesday, this is going in the newsletter, it's going to say that, and then it's going onto Facebook or whatever. Okay, so that's where you're getting down to the super, super details about what goes out when. All right, our fourth tool, and if you've got questions, Cameron says, I would love to see a picture of your wall of calendar pages. Christina and I need to do the one for this year, so we may be able to fulfill your wish at some point. We'll see. So your repurposing strategy, I want to talk about this a little bit. So when you're developing content, a lot of you just write something for your newsletter or your blog or whatever it is, you got to get that thing out. And then you slice and dice it onto social, and that's fine, that's repurposing. But I don't consider that a repurposing strategy. What I want you to do is really think about when you're sitting down to create content at the very beginning, how are all the different ways I can use this thing? So think about all the different channels. Think about short versus long. Think about more visual, more text. Think about how I can use it this week and this month and 6 months from now and next year. Think about all of that stuff as you're sitting down to create for the first time. You're going to really start to think about your content creation a little differently, And you're going to be much more efficient and effective by doing that because you're really sort of front loading all of that strategy about using content effectively. And so many of you are either not creating enough content because you're worn out, which means you're probably not really doing a good repurposing strategy, or you're just working too hard. You're creating way too much content, and you really could be making less stuff if you had a good repurposing strategy in place. So those are my tips for you today on editorial calendars. Who's got some questions for me? Feel free to send those in.